Here we go. Number 13 says, which value would be a solution for x in the inequality 47 minus 4x is less than 7? Okay, pretty simple stuff. It looks like a basic two-step inequality, so let's just go ahead and solve it. Okay, here we go. We need to isolate x, keep it by itself. So we need to subtract that 47 on both sides. You do the opposite of what's given. If it's positive, you make it negative. If it's negative, you make it positive. In this case, we're subtracting. So we have negative 4x is less than the number negative 40. 7 minus 47 is negative 40. Now to solve for x, you divide by the negative 4 on both sides. The negative 4's cancel. And we get x is greater than 10. Okay? What did I do here? When you divide by a negative, and this is a fact that you need to know. When you divide by a negative in an inequality, flip the sign. So in this case, it's less than. It has to become greater than. Negative 40 divided by negative 4 is a positive 10. Your answer is x is greater than 10 for the inequality. Now it says which value of x would work in the solution. Well, if x has to be greater than the number 10, the next answer on this page, it has to be choice 4. 11 would work. So x is equal to 11 actually satisfies this inequality. Negative 13 can't work. Negative 10 can't work. Positive 10 can't work. And if you chose choice 3, you're thinking of x is greater than or equal to 10. That's not the same thing as x is greater than 10. Okay, so your answer is choice 4. 14. Bella recorded data and used her graphing calculator to find the equation for the line of best fit. Then she then used the correlation coefficient to determine the strength of the linear fit. Which correlation coefficient represents the strongest linear relationship? So you should know by now that the correlation coefficient, which is just a number that describes the, not the accuracy, that describes the correlation or that describes the strength of the line. Is it a perfectly straight line, or is it scattered all over the place and you can't even figure out a pattern between the two? So the correlation coefficient, which is denoted by the letter R in your calculator, has to be between the numbers -1 and 1. That's a known fact. It has to be between -1 and 1. And -1 and 1 indicate a perfect relationship. This is also the strongest. I was spelling strangest. Strongest. Okay? Now, if R is equal to 0, which is in the middle, there's no correlation between the two variables. So now let's look at our answers. We have 0.9, 0.5, -0.3, and -0.8. Okay. 0.9 is pretty darn strong. So let's keep that in the running. 0.5 is not as strong as 0.9. This is actually a moderate relationship. You can see a trend, but it's moderate. It's not that strong, so choice 2 can't work. Choice 3 shows -0.3. Now, that is incorrect. Now, not because it's negative, because -0.3, again, shows a negative, moderate, or close to weak correlation. And choice 4 shows -0.8. Oh, shoot. Okay. Let's talk about these two. Choices 1 and 4. This shows positive 0.9. This shows -0.8. I don't care if it's positive or negative. You're looking for the one that is closest to either +1 or -1. And your answer is going to be choice 1. Because on the number line, -0.8 is not as close to -1 as 0.9 is to 1.
Number 15, the height in inches of 12 students are listed below. Then they give us all the status: 61, 67, 72, 62, 65, 59, 60, 79, 60, 61, 64, and 63. Which statement best describes the spread of these data? So 1, the set of data is evenly spread. 2, the median of the data is 59.5. 3, the set of data is skewed because 59 is the only value below 60. Or choice 4, 79 is an outlier, which would affect the standard deviation of these data. So we're talking about this right here. And the first choice, it says the set of data is evenly spread. We did talk about that in briefly in some of the previous lessons. We didn't go into too much detail. Same thing with number 3. The set of data is skewed because 59 is the only value below 60. So I know up here 59 is the only number that is below 60. So this might be true, this part, but we don't necessarily know if it's skewed just based on that. So we're going to go with the 2 easier choices first and see what we get. So it says 2, the median of the data is 59.5. Well, I know I can find the median pretty easily by using the calculator. So I'm going to go into my calculator, hit stat, hit edit, and I'm going to enter all of that data into this L1, which I already have done. You just hit the number and then hit enter for each one, and it creates the list. After you have the list, you're going to hit stat, go over to calc, 1 var stats, go down to calculate, and it gives me all of this information. So the median I need to scroll down for, it's MED in the calculator. And the median in the calculator says 62.5. Well, my choice says 59.5, so I know that one's not true. Let's talk about the outlier next. It's telling me that 79 is an outlier. So in order to figure out an outlier, I need to find the IQR first, which is the interquartile range. Now the interquartile range is found by doing Q3 minus Q1. So I'm going to stay in the calculator exactly where I was, and I'm going to find Q1 and Q3. So Q3 here is 66 minus Q1, which is 60.5. So now 60 minus 60, I'm sorry, 66 minus 60.5 is 5.5. Now my next step is to take that 5.5 and multiply it by 1.5. So 5.5 times 1.5 is 8.25. Now I need to take the median, which I know was 62.5, and I need to add it to the 8.25. And I need to subtract it to the 8.25. So when I do 62.5 plus 8.25, I get 70.75. And I get 62.5 minus 8.25, which is 54.25. So that means the outlier must be below 54.25 or above 70.75. Well, if I look back at my choice that I'm talking about, it says 79 is an outlier. Well, 79 is above 70.75. So choice 4 is my correct answer.
The graph of a quadratic function is shown below. Okay. An equation that represents the function could be what? So, without even looking at the answer choices, I want to just analyze this first. First of all standard quadratics touch the origin and usually have a positive smiley face, I call it. This is just the equation y equals x squared. Of course, it's not drawn to scale, but this is y equals x squared, okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at this graph that we have over here. Well, first of all, it is a sad face. It's a sad face. So what does that mean in terms of the sign or the leading coefficient? Well, your leading coefficient is negative. Because the parabola is sad, your leading coefficient is negative. So if you go back to your answers, You're looking for a negative out front. Oh, I see a positive. Nope. Negative, positive, get rid of that. Negative. Okay, so now we're down to choices 2 and 4. Here. So what's going to happen is we're just going to analyze the shift that's going on, okay? You need to know how to indicate your shifts. So this is the vertex, okay? This is the vertex. This will tell you everything about the horizontal shift as well as the vertical shift. The vertex is the point 15, 25, okay? 15 indicates a horizontal shift. Well, obviously it's shifting to the right, okay? So it is a horizontal shift to the right by 15 units. Then we have a vertical shift to vertical shift upwards. Vertical shift up by 25 units of measure. So now what we need to do is we just need to take that information and put it into our formula. Well, what you should know is that if you have a horizontal shift that's to the right, you think it's positive because you're going that way, it's actually going to be a negative answer inside the parenthesis because when you square it, it becomes positive. Hopefully that makes sense. And the vertical shift is the same as the sign. So if it's going up, the sign is positive if it's up. So your answer for this one is going to be choice 4. Okay? Now, let's just say you did not know how to do whatever I just did over here. There's another way out. Go to your graphing calculator. Okay? What you should do is you should really graph all of your equations in the graph. But to save some time, I'm just going to graph our answer just to show you that it is the correct answer. So negative 1/2 times x minus 15 squared plus 25. Okay? Now, obviously, you can't see it, but they actually tell you the graph. Go from 0 to 25 on the x, 0 to 25 on the y. Okay? So let's go ahead and do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hover over these numbers over here. I'm going to double click on this, make that 0, and I'm going to press tab. Make that 0, make that 25, and make the other one 25. This is the proper scale for our graph. And look at that, folks. That is an exact copy of what is given on the graph. Pretty simple stuff. Moving on to number 17. Which statement is true about the quadratic functions g of x shown in the table below and f of x is equal to x minus 3 squared plus 2? So, they have the same vertex, they have the same zeros, the axis of symmetry, okay, blah, blah, blah. So the best thing to do first is to actually analyze this data before even graphing this. So they have the same vertex. Well, the vertex means that it is a point that is all by itself, standalone, and the y values above and below the vertex are the same. What do we mean by that? So what you're going to do is you're actually going to find the turning point. That's another word for vertex. The turning point of the quadratic. And the turning point is clearly 3, -5. Why? Because the y values are the same on the top and the bottom of the -5. So the vertex of g of x is the point 3, -5. That also means if the vertex is 3, -5, that means that your axis of symmetry is x is equal to 3. Remember that your axis of symmetry passes through your vertex because it is symmetric on both sides. I'm going to show that to you later and prove my point. So now let's talk about the zeros of the function. Okay? The zeros are where the y value is 0. The y value is 0. So unfortunately, we don't have anything that tells us about anything with the y values being 0. All we know is that the turning point, all we know is that the 0 must be located in between the x values of 0, 1, and it must be located in between 5 and 6. So I'm going to say that the zeros are somewhere in between x equals 0 and 1 and x is equal to 5 and 6. Okay? Somewhere in between there. And that's about it that we can pull from this information. So now let's go ahead and graph this. F of x equals x minus 3 squared plus 2. Okay, let's do it. F of x equals x minus 3 squared plus 2. I typed in the Q. Okay, so we got this. Let's analyze it. Menu. Analyze graph. Minimum. This minimum will tell you the vertex of this. The vertex is 3, 2. The vertex over here is 3, negative 5. So that means that the answer, that they had the same vertex, makes absolutely no sense. The zeros. What do you know? This doesn't have a 0 because it doesn't cross the x-axis. Now, kind of doesn't have a 0. You'll see in Algebra 2 that there are things called imaginary roots, but that's for a later course. But in this case, there are no real zeros. It doesn't cross the x-axis. So we got to get rid of same zeros. Makes no sense. They have the same axis of symmetry. Well, I just said before that the axis of symmetry for this one is x is equal to 3. Let's go ahead and see if the axis of symmetry for this is x is equal to 3. Oh, wait a minute. The vertex is the point 3, 2. Your x value is 3. That means your axis of symmetry is x is equal to 3. Let me show you more. If I go to menu and I go to graph entry, edit, and relation, if I type in x is equal to 3, look at what happens. I'm going to change the color here. Look at what happens. It is symmetric down the parabola, and it is a mirror image on both sides. That is what axis of symmetry means. Is it symmetric on both sides? And in this case, it is. So your answer is choice 3. They have the same axis of symmetry.
Number 18, given the function f of n defined by the following. F of 1 equals 2, and f of n equals negative 5 times f of n minus 1 plus 2. Which set could represent the range of the function? So just when I see stuff like this, what I want to think of is patterns or sequences. And as soon as I see f of 1, a sub 1, I should be thinking or knowing that this is the first term. So that f of 1 means that we're talking about the first term. So the first term is 2. So let's just look at my choices real quick. Choice 1, the first term is 2. Choice 2, the first term is 2. Choice 3, the first term is negative 8. And choice 4, the first term is negative 10. So just based on that, knowing that this f of 1 means first term and that the first term is 2, I can get rid of choices 3 and 4 because choice 1 and 2 are the only ones with 2 as the first term. Well, now I need to decide, is it going to be 2, 4, 6, 8, or is the pattern going to be 2, negative 8, 42, negative 208? And how I do that is I start with f of 1, which equals to 2. Now I do f of n. I'm going to show you two different ways. I'm going to show you a little bit longer of a way and how the math actually works, and then I'm going to show you like a little shortcut. So f of 1 equals 2, and then f of the next term I need to find, because there's 4 down here, is f of 2. Well, if I'm finding f of 2, I'm just going to follow my formula. I have a negative 5 times f of n minus 1. Well, this n is now 2 because I'm finding the second term. So 2 minus 1 plus 2. So if I simplify this, it's negative 5. So f of 2 minus 1 is really f of 1 because 2 minus 1 is 1. And then plus 2. So negative 5 times, well, f of 1, I already know they told me is 2. So negative 5 times 2 plus 2. Well, negative 5 times 2 plus 2 comes out to be a negative 8. So that's a lot of work just to find f of 2, right? What really happened, this whole part right here that's being simplified, I took this 2 and I really replaced it in here. And then I just multiplied it out in the calculator to get negative 8. So what I'm saying really is that this f times n minus 1, and we've learned that in previous lessons, this piece right here means that we're using the previous term. So instead of doing all of that math again to find f of 3 and f of 4, there is a shortcut and we just use the previous term. So I'm just going to do that over here. F of 1 equals 2, right? So I'm going to find f of 2, f of 3, and f of 4 because there are 4 terms in my choices. So I'm going to set myself up using this formula. I do -5, parentheses, I'm going to be multiplying something in here, right? The previous term, plus 2. And I'm going to set that up for each piece. So now all I do is take the previous answer and I plug it into that parentheses. So -5 times 2 plus 2 is a -8. Well, now I take that -8 and I plug it into the next one. -5 times -8 is a positive 40 plus 2 is a positive 42. So I have 2 was my first term, then a -8, then a positive 42, and then I take the 42, I plug in. -5 times 42 plus 2 is a -208 when I check it in the calculator, which is the 4th term right here. So because all of these match, I know that choice 2 is my correct answer. So again, this is all the actual math and why we can just use the previous term. But as long as you can remember that f of n minus 1 is the previous term, you can use this shortcut method.
Number 19, an equation is given below. The solution to the equation is what? So let's just go ahead and solve for x. So I'm going to take that 4, distribute, take that 0.3, distribute. So we get 4x minus 4 times 7 is -28 is equal to 0.3x. Now 0.3 times 2 is 0.6 plus 2.11. Now let's combine like terms. I'm going to combine this term and this term, the 0.6 and the 2.11. So we get 4x minus 28 is equal to 0.3x plus 2.71. I'm then going to add the 28 on both sides. Okay? So we get 4x is equal to 0.3x plus 30.71. And then I'm going to subtract the 0.3x on both sides. That cancels. We get 3.7x is equal to 30.71. Divide by the 3.7 on both sides. And we get a final answer of x is equal to 8.3. Your answer is choice 1. For 20, a construction worker needs to move 120 cubic feet of dirt by using a wheelbarrow. One wheelbarrow loads it holds 8 feet cubed of dirt, and each load takes him 10 minutes to complete. One correct way to figure out the number of hours he would need to complete his job is what? Okay, there are 2 ways to solve this problem. I'm going to show you both ways. The first way is my personal way because it's not that I have difficulties with conversion factors, I don't like them. And I have a feeling that most of you do not like looking at this either. So I want to just use some basic logical mathematical deduction. So here's option 1 for you. Use logic. Okay? So here's the thing. A construction worker needs to move 120 cubic feet of dirt. One wheelbarrow only holds 8 cubic feet. So the first thing that you should think of doing is, all right, take 120 cubic feet and divide it by 8 cubic feet. This, and if you're wondering what this tells you, this will tell you the amount of times that the worker needs to go back and actually take this wheelbarrow and wheel out the dirt. When you take 120 divided by 8, that gives you the number 15. The number 15 tells you that the worker needs to use the wheelbarrow 15 times to move all the dirt. Okay? So 15, this means 15 loads of full wheelbarrows. Okay? Now, It says here it takes him 10 minutes to complete each one. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the 15 loads and multiply it by 10 minutes. It will take him 150 minutes to complete the job. Now, how do you find the total hours? Okay, well, there are 60 minutes in 1 hour. Just take 150 minutes and then divide it by the 60 minutes to convert it into hours. 150 divided by 60 gives you 2.5. That means that the worker will complete the job in 2 hours and 30 minutes, or 2.5 hours, really, which is the same thing as 2 hours and 30 minutes. So now what you're going to do, and if you want to, you could type in all of these into your calculator and see which one gives you the answer. Just to narrow down some time, I'm going to tell you that the answer is choice 4. And let me show you what to do. You're actually going to type in these fractions. Watch what it does for you. 120 divided by 1. Divided by 1. Times, open parenthesis, 1 divided by 8 times 10 divided by 1 times 1 over 60. Now, if the answer you get is 2.5, you know that's the answer. Okay, 5 halves is the same thing as 2.5. And if you put a decimal after one of those numbers, boom, 2.5. So we know that that is the answer, just because we know that it takes him 2 hours and 30 minutes to wheel. Now, let's just say you didn't like that way. There's a simpler way. You're going to look for conversion factors. You're going to look on the diagonal parts. Notice here, folks, that feet and feet are the same in the numerator and the denominator. Load and load are the same. Minute and minute are the same. Well, what's the question asking you to do? Number of hours. Notice what's by itself, folks. Notice what's by itself. Hours. And, by the way, a correct conversion factor, you have to cancel them out on the diagonal. As in, the feet have to cancel with the feet with the fractions next to each other. The load has to cancel with the load. The minute has to cancel with the minute. Look at all the other answers here. You cannot cross out feet cubed over here, and then you got to cross out feet cubed all the way over here. That doesn't make any freaking sense. And also, minutes and minutes are up top. Hours, this whole thing's a mess. That doesn't work at all because minutes are up top. You're supposed to have hours by itself. Okay, you're supposed to have hours. Then again, feet and feet are on top. No, one is supposed to be on the bottom, so they have to cross out with each other. That doesn't make any sense. Feet, load, feet. Oh, here we go again. Feet, feet. No, has to be crossing out, people, because we're looking for hours. That's why it's choice 4. Okay. Not a bad question, but could have been a lot worse. 21. Oh God, I hate this question so much. Hate this question. One characteristic of all linear functions is that they change by equal factors over equal intervals, unequal factors over equal intervals, equal differences over equal intervals, unequal differences over equal intervals. First of all, a linear function is constant. That's what I need you to know. It's constant. So the fact that unequal is in these answer choices makes no sense. So anything that says unequal, get rid of them. They make absolutely no sense because a line does have equal intervals because it is a line. It has a constant rate of change. Okay? It all comes down to the first part of each answer choice. Is it equal factors or is it equal differences? And you know what? In my opinion, this was a nasty question. You really had to know the definition of a line for this. Your answer is equal differences. Okay? Equal factors means multiplication. Okay? Equal differences is subtraction. Or, really, when you think about it, the difference between one point and the other is the same as you go up or down the graph. Equal factors means multiplication by scalars. So that is incorrect. Your answer is choice 3, equal differences over equal intervals. This choice 3 is the definition. It really is the definition of a line and its slope. I think that's a nasty question. You really had to just know the definition of a slope and a line. Okay, 22. What are the solutions to the equation x squared minus 8x is equal to 10? So there's two ways that you could do this. Since all the answers are in radical form, you either know that you're using the quadratic formula, which is kind of the go-to, x equals negative b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That can be found in your reference sheet, by the way. Or you could do my favorite, completing the square. Honestly, people, completing the square is not that bad. And completing the square, and if I might scare some of you, completing the square will haunt the hell out of you in geometry and algebra 2. So when I say you need to know how to complete the square, I'm not lying. You need to know how to complete the square. Next year in geometry, you're going to need to know how to complete the square. So what do we do? Completing the square means keep your letters on one side, numbers on the other. So let's go ahead and do it. So in this case, the letters and numbers are on different sides. So we're good. Okay. So let's take x squared minus 8x is equal to 10, and let's complete the square. In order to complete the square, you need to insert a blank space here and here. Because what you do to one side of the equation, you must do to the other side of the equation. But you might be thinking, wait, why are you all of a sudden adding a box? Well, I'll tell you. This box will allow us to acquire a perfect square trinomial on this side, factor it, then solve for x. That's our goal here. So in order to acquire a perfect square trinomial using the completing the square method, to get what's in the box, you need to take the middle term, which the middle term is negative 8, okay? That's your middle term. And you need to take half the middle term and square it. So you have negative 8 divided by 2 and square it. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. Negative 4 squared is 16. So you put a 16 here and a 16 here. Let's continue on. So now this is the spot where most people get messed up. We're like, all right, well, what do we do now? You need to factor. You need to factor this trinomial by the AM method. What adds to negative 8 and multiplies to give you positive 16? Well, your answer is x minus 4, x minus 4. Let's double check this. Negative 4 times negative 4 gives you a positive 16, and negative 4 plus a negative 4 gives you a negative 8. And then 10 plus 16 gives you an answer of 26. Okay? So we could actually rewrite the x minus 4 as x minus 4 squared is equal to 26. Pretty good so far? Now we take the square root of both sides. We get x minus 4, and that's all that's left because that square just is gone. X minus 4 is equal to plus minus. Don't forget about the plus minus. Plus minus the square root of 26. Now we're just going to add the 4 on both sides, right? You get x is equal to 4 plus minus the square root of 26. Now, if you look at all your answer choices, you're like, Trevor, is an answer? Oh, actually, it is there. Pfft, sweet. We don't even need to simplify that radical. I thought that we had to simplify that radical for a second. Sweet. So your answer is choice 2. Not too shabby of a question. Not too bad. Okay, how many more do we have left? Oh, 2 more questions? Oh, this is taking forever. 23. The formula for blood flow rate, oh, I don't like blood. Flow rate is given by F equals P1 minus P2 over R, where F is the flow rate, P1 is the initial pressure, P2 is the final pressure, and R is the resistance created by blood vessel size. Which formula cannot be derived from the given formula? Oh, you gotta be kidding me. This is gonna take us forever. Okay. Which formula cannot be derived from the given formula? So basically what they're doing here is they're using what's called literal equations. Literal equations means that you isolate one variable in terms of the other variables. Notice how there's absolutely no numbers in this equation. So you need to isolate one variable in terms of the others. So what they're doing here is they have P1, P2, R, and R, okay? So your job is to solve for P1, P2, and your R's. And you need to figure out which one's wrong. Honestly, let's shoot for the R first because there's two of them. And if we find out that both of them are correct, then we just go to the others. So let's go ahead and solve for R first just because there's two equations for our answer. So we're going to solve for R. Here we go. F, capital F, is equal to P1 minus P2 all over R. We need to solve for R. The best way to do this, folks, is to cross multiply, then solve for R. So if we cross multiply, so P1 minus P2 times 1 and F times R, we get R, capital F, equals P1 minus P2. Now we're going to divide by F to solve for R. Divide by F, and we get R is equal to P1 minus P2 over F. This, ladies and gentlemen, is solving for R. So choice 4 is correct. Choice 3 is incorrect because it says which formula cannot be derived. Yeah, your answer is choice 3.
Number 24. Morgan throws a ball up into the air. The height of the ball above the ground in feet is modeled by the function h of t equals negative 16t squared plus 24t, where t represents the time in seconds since the ball was thrown. What is the approximate domain for this situation? So I should be thinking, as soon as I see this word domain, we need to know that domain means the x values. Now I know we don't really necessarily see x in this scenario, but if I rewrite this, h of t equals negative 16 t squared plus 24t, and I went to go put that in the calculator, I wouldn't be putting h of t and I wouldn't be putting t. I would be putting y equals negative 16x squared plus 24x. So really, this t in the original function that they give us really is the same thing as x, okay? So when we're talking about domain, we're talking about x values. So if you look at our choices, choice 1 and 2 have a t in it, which is the same thing as x. And then 3 and 4 have h of t in it, which is the same thing as y. So because domain means x values, I don't want to deal with y's. Let's get rid of choice 3 and 4. I want to talk about the t or the x value. So now I need to decide, is it going to be between 0 and 1.5, or from 0 to 1.5, or from 0 to 9, the domain. Okay, so the other thing we need to know is that when we're talking about above the ground and we're throwing a ball above the ground, that means we're not really dealing with any negative numbers. We're only dealing with positive. So above ground means that we're dealing with positive numbers or positive heights in this case. Okay, so now next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in the calculator. I know I can plug this in. So y equals negative 16x squared plus 24x. I go to my table. I can see what it looks like if I want. Right, it goes up and then it comes back down, just like when we would throw a ball up into the air. Goes up and then back down. So now I go to my table. I want to look at the x values because we're talking about domain and this t represents x. Is it 0 to 1.5 or 0 to 9 where the ball is above the ground? So 0 x value has a 0 y value. So it's starting at 0, 0. Then it's 1, 8. So it's going up and then it's going to come back down. So if I look at 0, okay, we're still good. It's a 0, 0. And then 1.5 isn't necessarily on my calculator in my table. It's between 1 and 2, right? So it would be right in here somewhere. Well, my y values are 8 and then negative 16. So somewhere in between 1 and 2, it changes from positive to negative. So it could be 1.5. Let's just double check this since this is my only other choice. So if I scroll all the way down to 9, 9 is definitely a negative number, and we said above ground means positive numbers, right? If we throw the ball up in the air, I don't say it's at a negative 2 feet in the air. I say that it's a positive 2 feet. I throw it 2 feet up in the air. So 9 is a negative y value, so it can't be choice 2. It must be choice 1, 0 to 1.5. And again, in between 1 and 2 is where it changes over from a positive to a negative. So 1.5 would be still a positive number.